Project Management Professional Training Session 9. Planning for Communication and Stakeholder Management. PMP Exam Objectives. What it really means. 1.3 Perform stakeholder analysis. Perform stakeholder analysis using appropriate tools. PMP Exam Objectives. What it really means. 1.3 Perform stakeholder analysis. Without project stakeholders, there is literally no project. Your project is doomed to fail without successful project stakeholder management. Before asking what stakeholder management is, let's recall who the project stakeholders are. As discussed in Chapter 2, the amount of enthusiasm, anxieties, fears, and so forth varies with different stakeholders. Accordingly, they will have differing needs and expectations. One of the key project management focuses on which project success depends is achieving stakeholder satisfaction by meeting their needs and expectations while remaining aligned with project objectives. A key to keeping stakeholders' expectations aligned with project objectives and meeting those expectations is to keep stakeholders engaged in the project. Project managers have little, if any, control over the stakeholders. So, stakeholder management is all about stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder management and communication management are two inherently closely tied together project knowledge areas. As your project is doomed to fail without successful project stakeholder management, it requires successful communication management. Communication skills are critical for success not only in management, including project management, but also in a multitude of short-term and long-term tasks we perform each day. These skills can be applied to all communication techniques, such as verbal, written, video, and body language, as well as to listening. They are also an important component of other skills required for effective project management, such as negotiating, influencing, and leadership, which is one of the three skills that constitute the PMI's talent triangle for project management. Other common uses for communication skills are performing tasks such as fact-finding to develop or verify information, probing or analyzing an idea or situation, holding meetings and conducting discussions, setting and managing expectations, resolving conflict, and educating, coaching, motivating, persuading, or reassuring a person or a group. The central question in this chapter is, how do you plan for successful stakeholder and communication management for the success of the project? In search of an answer, we will explore three avenues: the big picture of stakeholder management and communication management, plan communication, and plan stakeholder engagement. Project stakeholder management, big picture. Project stakeholder management is all about getting stakeholders engaged in the project in order to get their support for the project. This knowledge area comprises four processes, summarized in Table 8.1. A high-level and simple view of the interaction between these processes is shown in Figure 8.1. Note, with the exception of integration management, there is no knowledge area other than stakeholder management that has processes in all the project stages before closing the project. This reflects the significance of stakeholder management. Before we can get stakeholders engaged in the project, we need to identify them by using the Identify Stakeholders process, discussed in Chapter 1. Still, before you can manage them, you need to plan. As pointed out earlier, managing stakeholders is all about their engagement in the project. So, we want to plan stakeholder engagement. Planning stakeholder engagement. Managing stakeholders is equivalent to managing their engagement in the project. So, the planned stakeholder engagement process is all about developing a management strategy to keep stakeholders engaged in an effective way throughout the project. We have all the required information about the stakeholders, such as their needs, expectations, influence, and impact, in the stakeholder register. Based on this, you develop approaches to interacting with stakeholders effectively. You use some tools and techniques on this information, along with the project management plan, to crank out the stakeholder management plan. The inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs of this process are shown in Table 8-2.as. The project proceeds, the memberships, needs, and expectations may keep changing, and hence this plan may need to be changed several times by reiterating the planned stakeholder management process. The first step to developing a stakeholder engagement plan is to get the raw data from the input items listed in Table 8.2. Raw data for stakeholder engagement plan. From the input items for this process, you extract information about the project and its stakeholders as raw data to help you develop approaches to involving stakeholders in the project, as shown in the following paragraphs. Information project level. From the project charter, fetch information about the purpose, objectives, and success criteria of the project. Also, from the project agreements, extract information on how to properly manage a stakeholder, including contractor, suppliers, and procurement group. Main sources of information about stakeholders. The stakeholder register is the main source of information about stakeholders, such as their identity, needs, expectations, etc. Also, from the project schedule, extract information about the project owner and executor, and from the resource management plan, get information about the role and responsibilities of stakeholders. Secondary sources of information about stakeholders. Assumptions about certain stakeholders can be found in the assumptions log, and information on the risk owners and impactors can be found in the risk register. Information about stakeholders with issues and those who may help to resolve them can be found in the issues log. As an example, one need of stakeholders with issues will be that you communicate with them. You can learn about stakeholders' attitudes toward and tolerance of risk from the risk management plan. From the change log, extract information about those stakeholders who are sources of change requests and those who will decide to accept, reject, or postpone a given request. General support information for stakeholder management. As mentioned earlier, stakeholder management and communication management are tightly coupled. Communication strategies and their implementation from communication management would provide useful information for stakeholder management processes. It's critical that you adapt stakeholder management to the project environment. That's where enterprise environmental factors play a role as input to this process. The organizational structure and culture in conjunction with political climate and stakeholders' risk tolerance can be used to select better options so as to effectively adapt stakeholder management to the project environment. Factors like geographical distribution of facilities and resources, and local and global culture and trends may also influence the development of an engagement plan. The important organizational process assets in this process include the organizational policies and procedures about media, ethics, security, risk, communications, and so on. For effective and efficient stakeholder management, it's important to learn from experience. Therefore, the lessons learned database and historical information are especially useful organizational process assets used as input for the planned stakeholder management process. You use the information discussed in this section as raw data for certain methods to develop the stakeholder engagement plan, as discussed in the next section. Tools and techniques to develop stakeholder engagement plan. To develop the stakeholder engagement plan, you do the following. 1. Analyze the raw data discussed in the previous section. 2. Compare the analysis results with benchmark. 3. Prioritize stakeholders and their needs. 4. Present the information in an easily usable form. These steps are elaborated in the following. Data analysis. There are usually multiple possible strategies to apply to stakeholder engagement. These are tailored using analysis of assumptions and constraints, example, about the stakeholders and their needs and expectations. Furthermore, you need to find the fundamental reason for the current level of support or opposition of the project by a stakeholder so that you can choose appropriate strategies to bring the support or opposition to a desirable level. This fundamental reason is found by conducting a root cause analysis. Comparing results. You can compare the results from data analysis, just described, with a suitable benchmark, such as results from a world-class project in the application area of your project. Decision-making. You can prioritize stakeholders and their needs or requirements using decision-making techniques, such as prioritizing or ranking. These decision-making techniques have been explained and used in several chapters, such as Chapter 12. Data presentation. The data presentation should present the information in an easily usable form. For example, mind mapping can be used to visually display information about stakeholders and how they are related to each other and to the organization. An important piece of information about stakeholders is stakeholder engagement, which is the heart of stakeholder management, as it's critical to project success. You can define different levels of engagement for your project, such as those shown in Table 8.3. You should also always know what the current engagement level of a given stakeholder is, and what level of engagement is required for that stakeholder for the project to succeed. This information can be complied in the Stakeholders Engagement Assessment Matrix, as shown in a simple example in Table 8.4, which compares each stakeholder's current engagement level with the desired one. Current indicates the current engagement, and desired indicates the desired engagement. The project team needs to identify the desired engagement level for the current phase of the project based on available information. The example in Table 8.4 shows that stakeholder Janet is at the desired engagement level, while stakeholders Shanti, John, and City Mayor require further communications and additional actions to move them to the desired level of engagement. The Stakeholders Engagement Assessment Matrix exposes the gaps between the current and desired engagement levels. Accordingly, you can act through the stakeholder management processes to close these gaps. In the process of analysis for engagement planning, you will be holding meetings with the relevant stakeholders and seeking their expert judgment as needed on relevant topics, such as understanding and dealing with internal and external politics, culture, and power structure, appropriate communication means and strategies under different situations, and strategies for stakeholders' project engagement. The output of this process is the Stakeholder Management Plan, which contains strategies to implement and actions to perform to facilitate stakeholders' creative involvement in the project, such as making project decisions and project execution. The Stakeholder Management Plan is implemented in the process of managing stakeholder engagement, which is discussed in the execution and monitoring and controlling parts of this book. As you saw, the Communication Management Plan is an input to the plan's stakeholder engagement process, and it underlines the close connection between stakeholder management and communication management. After all, stakeholders need to be communicated with. Before we discuss how to develop the Communication Management Plan, let's take a look at the big picture of project communication management. Managing project communication, big picture. There is a common thread that runs through almost all activities and processes in project management, and that is communication. The project and its activities will fail without effective communication. Communication is an exchange of information among persons and groups by using an effectively common system of signs, symbols, and behavior. I use the term effectively common to consider the fact that even if two communicating entities are using two different systems, the translators between the communicating entities produce the results as if the two entities were using a common system. For example, I might be using a Windows computer, and you might be using a Macintosh, but we can exchange emails without having to deal with the differences between the two machines. Tip communication is a common thread that runs through almost all activities and processes in project management. You manage communication using processes in the communication management knowledge area, but communication itself permeates through almost every project activity. The importance of communication in project management cannot be overemphasized. Even a well-scheduled and well-funded project can fail in the hands of a hardworking team of experts due to the lack of proper and timely communication. As a project manager, you may be dealing with a wide functional variety of individuals, ranging from executives, to marketing personnel, to sales folks, to technologists. You should be able to wear different communication hats depending upon with whom you are communicating. For example, you will not be talking in terms of technical jargon with executives or marketing folks, and you will not speak marketing lingo to software developers. You will be speaking to different stakeholders in their language, while filling the language gap between different functional groups and eliminating misunderstandings due to miscommunication. The key point is that you put on the appropriate communication hat depending on which individual or group you are communicating with. Be able to switch communication hats quickly and avoid technical jargon and acronyms that are not understood by the person or the group you are communicating with. The goal is clarity of language to convey the message accurately. In a project, you will be communicating with project stakeholders. The intrinsic connection between communication management and stakeholder management is illustrated in Figure 8.2, with communication management processes in black and stakeholder management processes in gray boxes. As shown in Table 8.5, project communication management is constituted by the following three processes. Plan communication. This is the process of determining the project information needs and accordingly developing the project communication plan to meet those needs. Manage communication. This is the process of managing the distribution of relevant information to the right stakeholders at the right time by using the right methods. This managing of information covers creating, collecting, storing, retrieving, and distributing needed project information. Monitor communication. This process oversees the communication to make sure that the information needs of stakeholders are adequately met throughout the project as planned, and that the communication is producing the desired impact. Tip: the major goal of communication management is to deliver the right information to the right stakeholders at the right time by using the right methods to produce the desired impact. In a nutshell, communication in project management has much to do with managing the information and delivering it to project stakeholders at the right time by using the appropriate methods. We plan project communication for the project stakeholders identified in the initiation stage. Planning project communication. First, you should realize that communication activities may be performed in many possible ways, from body language to word of mouth or written formal documents, from with your peers to up the organizational hierarchy, to the media, and from unofficial to official. You should be conscious of using an appropriate way of communicating depending on the nature of the communication task at hand and the person or group you are communicating with. In a project environment, communication means communicating with the project stakeholders. Plan communication is the process of determining the information needs of the project stakeholders, which in general will be different for different stakeholders, and accordingly designing the communication approach within the constraints of available organizational assets to meet those needs. To be specific, communication planning determines the following: the communication and information needs of each project stakeholder, individual, and group. The few Ws: what information is needed, where it will be stored, when it is needed, who needs it, who will deliver it, who can access it, etc. How the information will be delivered, for example, by email, phone call, or presentation. Gap factors, time zone differences, language barriers, and cross-cultural barriers. Caution: planning communication is the process of determining the information needs of each project stakeholder and accordingly the communication approach. Poor planning will produce undesired results, such as the wrong individuals getting sensitive information, necessary information not getting to the right stakeholders in time, the wrong communication methods being used, and so on. As mentioned in the previous chapter, the stakeholder register is developed during the Identify Stakeholders process, which along with the project plan is the major input into the plan communication process presented in Table 8.6 in terms of its inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. Also, because communication is the common thread running through the whole project, and because it must be adapted to the whole project environment, all the enterprise environmental factors and all the organizational process assets should be considered as input. Historical information and lessons learned are particularly important because they can be used when wisely planning the communication based on experience. Performing the plan communication management process. The core of planning communication management can be expressed in the following steps in terms of the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs listed in Table 8.6. 1. From the resource management plan, get relevant how-to information about resources, such as team members, other stakeholders, and communication resources, including how they are categorized, allocated, managed, and released. The info may help in determining their communication need and how to fulfill it. 2. From the stakeholder engagement plan, learn about the stakeholder engagement strategies, which would need communication to be implemented. 3. Find out about stakeholders from the stakeholder register and project charter, which identify the key stakeholders and possibly their responsibilities. 4. Fetch stakeholders' communication requirements from the requirement documentation, if any. 5. Determine the stakeholders' communication needs by performing a communication requirement analysis on the information or raw data collected in the preceding steps. 6. Determine the communication technology to use to store and deliver the information. 7. Determine the communication methods and models to communicate. 8. Determine interpersonal and team skills data present tie-in techniques to be used in communication. 9. Document all these determinations and how-tos in the communications management plan. 10. Update the documents that need to be updated as a result of this process, such as those listed in the output column of Table 8-6. The tools and techniques mentioned are explained in the following section. Tools and techniques for communication planning. Recall that communication is the transferal of information from one point to another. It expends resources. To optimize the use of resources and the benefits of communication, you need to analyze the communication requirements and determine the best communication technology to be used to facilitate information transfer. These and other relevant tools and techniques are discussed in the following sections. Communication requirements analysis. Communication requirements needed for the communication planning process must be analyzed. This analysis will generate a list of the communication needs of the project stakeholders. For example, a communication requirement may specify the type of information and the format in which this information should be delivered. The analysis of this requirement will estimate the value of this communication requirement. For example, fulfillment of this requirement will significantly contribute to the success of the project, or the lack of it will result in the failure of the project or one of its components. So, one of the purposes of communication requirements analysis is to optimize the use of resources in communication by prioritizing requirements. Tip: communication requirements need to be analyzed to determine the communication needs of the project stakeholders. This is important for achieving optimal use of the communication resources and for project success. The following are some examples of what types of information and sources of communication requirements you will need in order to analyze communication requirements for your project. Input documents, type of information and sources of communication requirements mentioned in the previous section. Relationships, organizational and stakeholder responsibility relationships. Organizational charts can be helpful to figure out some of this information. Groups, different groups, disciplines, departments, and specialties involved in this project, for example, marketing, sales, and engineering as departments and software engineering and testing as groups in the engineering department and their interdependencies. Logistics, how many individuals and groups will be involved in the project and where they are located. Obviously, this information is necessary to plan communication. Information needs. Communication is performed to deliver or exchange some kind of information. So, to plan communication effectively, it's important to know the following information needs. Information needs of the stakeholders. Internal information needs, for example, communication across the performing organization and communication within the project team. External information needs, for example, communicating with contractors, media, and the public. Legal requirements, such as privacy of certain types of information. Number of communication channels or paths in different modes such one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. You can appreciate the complexity of communication by realizing that there are n1/2 possible communication channels among n stakeholders in many-to-many mode. You can derive this formula by realizing that each of n individuals can communicate with n1 other individuals. If we multiply n by n1, we are double counting each channel, and hence we divide by 2. For example, if there are 20 stakeholders, the possible number of communication channels is 20 to 1/2 equals 190. Caution! Note that PMI lists communication technology, communication models, and communication methods as tools and techniques in the planned communication management process. Generally, we use the tools and techniques listed in a process to run the process. But in this case, we are determining, not necessarily using, the communication technology, models, and methods that will be needed to facilitate communication among stakeholders. Based on your project's communication needs, you can determine which communication technology, models, and methods will be appropriate to meet these needs. Communication technology determination. Depending on the communication needs and the nature of the information, a communication technology may vary from a conversation in a hallway, to meetings, to a sophisticated information system. The following factors can contribute to determining the communication technology to be used for your project. Availability. If you are considering a number of options, obviously the technology that's already in place is more likely to be chosen. Project environment. The project environment can also affect the choice of communication technology. For example, the communication technology requirements for a project team that meets face-to-face will be different from those of a virtual team. Project length. The length of the project affects communication technology requirements in the following ways. Is it worth it to spend on a technology for the given length of the project? Will the technology under consideration change during the course of the project? If yes, that will mean extra cost for the new technology and for training team members to use it. Urgency of the information need. How frequently the information needs to be updated will also play a role in determining the communication technology. For example, information that does not need to change frequently can be delivered in written reports, whereas information that can change very frequently can be delivered through web pages. Staffing preparation level. Another factor that can be considered in making the communication technology decision is the user's, project team and other stakeholders' level of preparation for using a given technology. Are the users already fluent in this technology or will they need to be trained? Training and learning for the project staff could be valid issues on the table. Confidentiality of information. This will also influence what technology you can use. Organizational policy on the use of social media. This will affect what information you can put on social media. The communication model presented in Figure 8.3 is very general, out of which we can slice PMI's models, as shown here. 1. Eliminate feedback message and any consideration of noise from Figure 8.3, and you have got PMI's basic sender/receiver model of communication. In this model, a message can be sent, but it does not ensure that the message was understood by the receiver because there is no feedback. 2. To the basic sender/receiver model, add a feedback message and noise consideration due to physical sources such as technology or infrastructure, and you have got the basic interactive model. It can be used to send a message with some assurance that the message is understood. 3. To the basic interactive model, add human factors such as culture differences to the sources of noise, and you have got the more complex interactive model, as presented in Figure 8.3. It can be used to send a message with assurance that the message is understood. For the communication to work, both the sender and the receiver have some responsibilities. The responsibilities of the sender include ensuring that the message being sent conveys the complete information clearly and that the information is received correctly and understood properly by the receiver. The responsibilities of the receiver include ensuring that the information is received correctly and understood properly in its entirety and that it is acknowledged. Communication methods. In its most basic form, communication is an exchange of information between two entities. Even communication among several entities is better handled by looking at it as a set of exchanges between two entities. For example, A communicating with B, C, and D is a set of exchanges between A and B, A and C, and A and D. In other words, an exchange between two entities is the basic building block of communication. So, we can always break down a communication into an exchange between a sender and a receiver. From the perspective of how the sender and the receiver are involved with each other through the communication system, communication can be classified into the following two main categories. 1. Interactive communication. In this type of communication, the receiver receives the message and sends a response to it. This way, the communicating entities keep switching the roles of sender and receiver. There are two kinds of interactive communication. Asynchronous communication, a communication in which the two communicating entities do not have to be present on both ends of the communication line at the same time. Email is an example of asynchronous communication because when the sender of the email pushes the send button, the intended recipient of the email message does not have to be logged onto the email server. The recipient can log on later, retrieve the message, and read it. Synchronous communication, a communication in which the two communicating entities have to be present on both ends of the communication line at the same time. It's a live, real-time communication. If you are not present when the sender is sending the message, you miss the message. Speaking with someone face-to-face and conversing with someone on the phone are two examples of synchronous communication. 2. One-way communication. There are two kinds of one-way communication. Pull communication. Pull communication is used when it's up to the receivers to determine if and when they need the information. In this kind of communication, the receiver pulls the information from a pool of information. Downloading from websites is an example of this communication method. Push communication. In this kind of communication, the sender broadcasts the information to a set of entities without waiting for the request of information and without the need to confirm that the information reached its destination. Marketing emails and letters are examples of push communication. Status reports are another example. The pull and push methods can also be used in conjunction with each other. For example, the sender can also push the information to a pool, and the receivers can pull it from there at their own convenience. Communication types discussed here are called communication methods in the PMI standard. Depending on the purpose, the project manager can decide which of these communication methods to use. Quite often a hybrid approach is used in the real world, that is, a mix of more than one method. Note communication approaches, to be determined for communication plan, refers to the setting or environment in which the information flows, such as interpersonal communication, example, face-to-face conversation, small group communication, many-to-many, example, a meeting, public communication, one-to-many, example, one speaker addressing a gathering, mass communication, one-to-many, example, broadcast or as press release, and network computing technology, example, online social work sites. Interpersonal and team skills, including the following, can be used when dealing with different aspects of communication, as explained next. Political awareness refers to recognizing and understanding the power structure of the organization and the influence of this structure on the relationships in the organization. This technique determines the proper communication approaches and strategies needed to operate within this power structure of the organization. Cultural awareness refers to recognizing and understanding the cultural differences among stakeholders. This technique determines the proper communication approaches and strategies needed to operate within the framework of cultural differences and sensitivity. This will help you avoid misunderstandings and resulting conflicts caused by poor understanding of cultural differences and cultural insensibilities. Communication style assessment. This technique refers to identifying proper content presentation and format and preferred delivery method for a planned communication activity. This is often used for less supportive stakeholders to fill the gap between their current support position and the desired one as recorded in the stakeholder engagement assignment matrix. To close this gap between current project support position and the desired one, the engagement assignment matrix can be reanalyzed to modify or identify new communication requirements. Of course, in the process of making these determinations, you will need to hold meetings with the project team and other stakeholders about communicating and other matters. You can also seek expert judgment on communications-related topics and matters. The result of the activities described in this and the previous sections is the generation of the Project Communication Plan. Project Communication Plan. The major output of communication planning is the Communication Management Plan. This is the document that describes the communication expectations and needs and the plans for how these needs will be met. It includes the following: communication requirements of the project stakeholders, information to be communicated, content, format, and level of detail. Who will communicate the information, who will receive it, and why. The person responsible for authorizing the release of confidential information. Methods of communication that will be used, such as email, presentation, and press release. The frequency of communication, such as daily or weekly. The method and procedure for escalating issues that cannot be resolved at a lower staff level, such as project level. A glossary of common communication terminology. Methods and procedures for updating and refining the communication management plan if needed as the program progresses. Communication constraints. When executing a project in this information age, more likely than not you will need multiple technologies for communication, such as email, web calendars, and video conferencing. Therefore, it is important that you plan for the communication technology requirements. This planning has two components: the tools that are needed and the usage of those tools. To determine which tools are needed, ask questions such as the following. How frequently do you need to update the information? Will the team hold face-to-face or virtual meetings? For information that does not change often, written reports will be sufficient, whereas information that needs to be updated frequently and on a moment's notice needs web communication tools. To plan effective usage of the tools, ask the following questions. Are the tools, communication systems, already in place and ready to be used? Will the available communication tools change before the program ends? Are the team members familiar with the tools or do they need training to use them? Also, there will be methods and procedures for how to modify the plan, if need be. Updates to project documents. During communication planning, you might realize that you need to make some changes in the project schedule and stakeholder register. Accordingly, you will need to change these documents. Tip: while planning for communication, or doing anything, for that matter, pay attention to details, ask questions, and probe the situation to come to a better understanding. A well-understood problem is already half solved. Be an active and effective listener. Part of managing stakeholders' expectations is to keep them on the same page as you. To stay on the same page with the stakeholders, it's important to distribute the relevant information at the right time. Study Checkpoint 8.2. Knowing the planned communication management process, answer the following. Q1. Describe which EEFs can influence this process. Q2. Describe which OPAs can influence this process. Q3. Describe how the documents listed in the output column of Table 8.6 will be updated. With the communication plan in our hands, we are ready to make communication happen. Example, implement the plan by managing and monitoring communications, which is covered in the execution and monitoring and controlling parts of this book. The three most important takeaways from this chapter are the following. Stakeholder management is about managing engaged stakeholders in the project and monitoring that engagement. Communication is a common thread that runs through the project lifecycle. So, it's important to develop a communication plan early in the project. Stakeholder management and communication management are inherently closely tied, using each other's plans. Summary. Stakeholder management and communication management are two inherently closely tied project knowledge areas. It is crucial for the success of the project to get the support of stakeholders for the project, which is best done by getting them engaged in the project at appropriate levels at appropriate times. Project stakeholder management is all about stakeholder engagement, of which the big part is managing stakeholders' needs, expectations, and concerns. In stakeholder management, you first identify stakeholders using project business documents and other items as input to produce a stakeholder register. Then you generate the stakeholder engagement plan by using the project charter and other items as input. Communication is the common thread that runs through almost all activities and processes in project management. There are three communication processes: plan communication to determine communication, manage communication to make it happen, and monitor communication to ensure it happened. The key to the project and the mantra of effective communication is the distribution of the right information to the right stakeholders at the right time by using the right communication methods to create the desired impact. To determine how to do this, you need to plan communication, for which you need to identify stakeholders and develop a stakeholder management strategy. Because the processes of generating the communication management plan and stakeholder engagement plan are performed throughout the project, the communication management plan can be used as an input to the process of generating the stakeholder engagement plan, and the stakeholder engagement plan can be and is used as an input to the process of generating the communication management plan, as shown in Figure 8.1. This demonstrates that stakeholder management and communication management are closely tied project knowledge areas. Road ahead. In this part of the book, you learned how to scope and schedule the project and plan for its different aspects, such as resources including cost, risk, quality, procurement, stakeholders, and communication. With plans, you execute the project, as we will discuss in the next part of this book. Exams I view. Comprehend. The communication management plan is an input to all the stakeholder management processes, and the stakeholder engagement plan is an input to all the planned communications management processes. Managing stakeholders includes identifying stakeholders, planning stakeholder engagement, and monitoring and controlling stakeholder engagement. The stakeholder management plan contains strategies to implement and actions to perform to facilitate stakeholders' creative involvement in the project, such as making project decisions and project execution. Plan communication is the process of determining the information needs of the project stakeholders and accordingly determining which tools and methods to use to meet those needs by producing, storing, and delivering information. Communication requirement analysis is performed to determine the communication needs of the project stakeholders and to optimize the use of the communication resources for project success. Look out! There is no stakeholder management plan, only a stakeholder engagement plan. Managing stakeholder expectations is crucial to the success of the project by keeping these expectations in line with the project management plan. After the stakeholders have been identified, stakeholder management is all about managing and controlling stakeholder engagement. A key purpose of the stakeholder engagement plan is to support the interaction with project stakeholders to serve the project's interests. Communication plays a critical role in keeping the stakeholders engaged in the project. Memorize. Project stakeholder management consists of 5 processes: identify stakeholders, plan stakeholder engagement, manage stakeholder engagement, and monitor stakeholder engagement. The Stakeholders Engagement Assessment Matrix is a table that compares individual stakeholders' current engagement level with the desired one. Stakeholder management is not about managing or controlling the stakeholders, it is about managing or controlling their engagement in the project. Mind mapping is a technique used to visually display information about stakeholders and how they are related to each other and to the organization. Review questions. 1. You have just joined a project that has already been planned. You want to take a look at strategies to implement and actions to perform to facilitate stakeholders' creative involvement in the project, such as making project decisions and project execution. Where you will look. A. Stakeholders Engagement Assessment Matrix. B. Mind Mapping. C. The Stakeholder Engagement Plan. D. Project Stakeholder Register. 2. Which of the following is not generated during the planned stakeholder engagement process? A. Stakeholder Register. B. Stakeholder Engagement Plan. C. Stakeholders Engagement Assessment Matrix. D. Strategies about stakeholders' involvement. 3. The focus of the stakeholder management knowledge area is A. Stakeholder management. B. Managing stakeholder expectations. C. Controlling stakeholders. D. Stakeholder engagement. 4. Project business documents are input to which stakeholder process? A. Identify stakeholders. B. Manage stakeholder expectations. C. Plan stakeholder management. D. Monitor stakeholder engagement. 5. Which of the following communication skills are necessary for a project manager? A. Listening. B. Negotiating. C. Resolving conflict. D. Pursuing a team. E. Setting expectations. Select the most correct answer. A. All except A. B. All except A and E. C. All except D. D. All. 6. You want to ensure that messages are delivered and understood. Which communication model would you implement for that to happen? A. Basic sender/receiver communication model. B. Basic interactive communication model. C. More complex interactive model. D. B or C. 7. You are trying to understand the message sent to you by one of your team members, who lives on the other side of the globe. The team member has used lots of local phrases and acronyms that you are trying to understand. According to the basic communication model, what are you dealing with here? A. Noise and decoding. B. Encoding and feedback. C. Message and feedback. D. Broken English. 8. Which of the following is not an output of communication planning? A. Methods of communication. B. Communication constraints. C. Frequency of reporting the project status. D. Stakeholder management strategy. 9. Which of the following is not a part of communications? A. Presentations. B. Emails. C. Risk reports. D. To send an email message.